Okay, am I,
We can hear you. You're good to go.
okay, great. Well, good evening, everybody. Yeah, my name is Ross Hunter. I'm the old guy from the Alberta Trappers Association. I've been involved with wildlife control for the last 35 years, and I thought maybe I could add some options and things like that for you when you're looking at some of the problems that you have with predation. There's a lot of misconceptions, and most of it generally stems around when it comes to trappers being involved with producers, is the lack of understanding of each other's industry, basically, because trapping is an industry. It's not a sport like hunting and fishing. For some, it may be that way, but the provincial government regulates it as an industry, and we have the strictest regulations for humane trapping in the world. So, and we're also the world leader on that. So hopefully tonight we can offer some ideas and suggestions. I have noticed that you have an excellent website, and there's a lot of information there about different methods of being able to manage predatory wildlife. And I think it's really well done. As somebody that's done it for so many years, I've come to realize that each thing only offers a window, and usually a combination of all of those things is the way to go. But I have met many ranchers, producers that have had such a hatred for wild animals because of what they've done, and their object is to control all of them or to wipe them out, basically. And it's a unethical and a very unrealistic approach. So trapping is an option in the event that other methods are not working. But the way that a place is managed, the death of the animals, the birthing of the animals, and things like that, I'm sure that you're all aware, as there is a lot of literature on that. But there are times when trapping plays an important role, and that's what I'm going to speak to tonight. I didn't bring a PowerPoint. I've been using PowerPoints for a very long time, and I thought that I would keep this fairly non-formal. What we've done at the Alberta Trappers Association is to try to train as many people as we can get interested in this program, to give them some insight in being able to deal with landowners and producers, how to make good communication with them, how to deal with fish and wildlife officers, and set themselves so that they're more of a operational business than just a trapping or a hobby, as it would be to some people. But when I talk about this, what I'd like to present first off is that what I have learned in the ranching industry. I spent a good part of my life in the ranching industry, mainly with cattle, but nevertheless, it's still, you're dealing with livestock. What I have learned is that when I've tried to put producers with reputable trappers, and I say reputable trappers, I'm talking about trappers that know what they're doing and have a good handle on how to manage wildlife. One of the problems that comes up is that the wildlife create the problems right when the producer is going into production. In other words, they're beginning to lamb or something like that, or they're calving their cows, and all of a sudden they've got a huge problem. They've got coyotes or wolves or whatever's coming in there, and sometimes it's a little late to be grasping for straws at that time. Now we have to deal with these issues when they come up, and I realize that, but there is a better way. And so when I've tried to link them up, I apologize for my jumping around with this, but the trapper has a very short window where he's able to operate. And that is because of several things, because of regulatory guidelines that state that he's only allowed to trap during certain seasons. And the end of the trapping season for fur is the end of February. And a lot of people start calving in March or lambing. And so when they really need the trapper the most, he's not available. And the trapper isn't going to get any compensation because there's no value in the fur after the end of February. Now, there are the odd exception to that, but for the most part, trapping, the season and the regulatory season ends in most of the areas by the 28th of February. So the object of this is to try to get the producers looking at this time of the year as we move into the fall. If you look at the dynamics of predatory animal, any wildlife really, we have the carrying capacity, which is what we call it, what the area can sustain for numbers of animals, depending on whatever animal that is. As we move along into the summer months, those are the gravy months. That's when most wildlife is doing really well. They're birthing in the spring. The summertime is the easiest time. As we move into the fall and into the cold months when we start winter, now everything has reached its capacity. So the population is at its highest peak. And there's juveniles now that are leaving home and they're looking for territory to get set up. I like to refer to them as the homeless people because that's a lot of people, it's easier for them to relate to. They have no place to go. They can't stay where they're at. And as they try to migrate along, they don't have what they need. And those are the ones that get into the most of the trouble. So the object with this is that if a producer can get linked up with a trapper early in the season, so if we look at October as an example, if the producer and the trapper have a chance to talk together, the trapper realizes that the producer is quite open to having him come in and do some trapping in that area. He can come in the end of October or sometime in October and start putting bait or lure or whatever they've agreed to into the area so that he's setting himself up ahead of the season. As he moves into the winter, as we get into November, the fur becomes prime, and that's the main part for the trapper. Because by the end of February, not only is the season closed, the fur has no value anymore. They've gone out of the prime, thickest part of their pelt, and in order to be able to sell on a market, you want to have thick fur. So when they team up together, the trapper begins in November. He starts putting his sets out. Well, if he's trapped through the winter and he's doing a good job, by the time lambing season starts, and I'm going to use the example of the 1st of March, maybe some people are doing so before that, but you get the idea. By that time, that trapper should have been able to bring the total population down to a much more manageable number of animals. And the ones that haven't been trapped, that are still there, have learned that this is a really poor ranch to hang around. So we're taking advantage of population dynamics and we're putting it to good use. That's one of the weakest links in linking up our industry with the livestock producers. So I hope that makes some sense to you. When we do this, we have a really good window for the two of them to communicate. And for the trapper, he needs to know that he can get out there if it's really in an area where they get a lot of deep snow, so that he can get bait back out there and be more productive with what he's doing. So that's the foremost, the biggest part of what I wanted to present tonight, so that you understand what you can do with this. If you get started early in the season. When a trapper, this is his season. He's getting itchy feet now. He's starting to get his gear together. He's looking forward to the season. He may be out traveling, looking for areas, things like that, where he can do some trapping. So if we can team up, a lot of good work can come from that. We have a program that we offer at the Alberta Trappers Association to help a lot of trappers that are working on this. I mentioned to it already a little bit about that. We call it a resident trapline management program. It's a 2-day program where we teach them how to work with landowners, how to follow up with landowners, and what types of things that have caused conflict or problems. In other words, trappers are coming out, they're bringing a couple of buddies or things like that, and we explain to them how, for the landowner, that's just not acceptable. He's had enough problems with people on the land, things like that. This program's been very effective, and a lot of our trappers are ready and willing and able to be able to take on something like this. So some trappers have been trained in being able to understand predation so that they can help the rancher when there has been something that's been killed. They can skin it, take a look at it, and identify what it was that actually killed the animal. So I know Fish and Wildlife is willing to do some of this, but I think we all know that Fish and Wildlife, we have sometimes 2 officers in an area half the size of Germany trying to manage an area. They just don't have the manpower nor the ability to be able to go out and help everybody that's having problems. So the best option that I see is for trappers to be able to help. Now, there are people that have an enormous amount of land and lease land, and they're talking about quite a bit of an area. And they're restricted on that as to what they can do and what they can't do because of predation. And for those people, I would really recommend that they themselves take the time. It's a 3-day program, 3-day course, and become a licensed trapper. And from there, then you don't have to trap for fur. You don't have to do all of the things that are associated with trapping that's distasteful to you. But as a landowner or somebody that controls large areas of land, it's your best option so that you're not having to rely on other people when it comes to either using restraining devices or lethal devices. Because you've been trained, you already are licensed. And so even in the off season, if you can get a damage control permit, as long as you're licensed to be able to handle the equipment, then you have the advantage. You can be out there dealing with your own problems or with wildlife problems. Now, you don't learn everything you need to know in 3 days. So if it was that easy, I think I'd be out of work. But what I'm getting at is that you have the license so that you're looked at as a license in the industry as a trapper. So you're allowed to use the devices. There's lots of workshops, there's training. I honestly, as the community liaison, I'll do anything I can to help producers. I've seen the devastation that has come from predation issues that have gotten completely out of control. Well, just some background on that part of it. Not all coyotes are bad, just like not all wolves are bad. There are some that start killing, and once they start that kind of thing, it's very difficult to stop it. Being able to catch the specific problem animals can be very difficult. And so when we read literature, a lot of the literature talks about non-lethal systems, and they talk about catching the problem coyotes. But what seems to be missed is that there's always going to be problems because they continue to have young. So when I try to present this to people who have maybe from the city or people who have a very utopian idea of nature, I need to help them to understand that every year wildlife overpopulates. Each area can only sustain a certain amount of animals. And in some regions, sometimes as high as 65% of the juvenile population will die before it's a year old in our boreal wilderness. It's quite astounding. And so I compare that to a producer rancher who buys sheep or cattle, has his breeding stock, puts a lot of effort, a lot of money into that. And then after the breeding stock have their young, if they decide they feel sorry for all the little ones and they don't want to harm them, so they decide to keep them. Not only do they not make any money, but their population quickly doubles, and by the following year, you've got too many in the area. You can't sustain that many animals. That's a pretty simple thing for people to understand. It's really no different than a glass of water. Once you reach the top of the carrying capacity, the rest is overflow. And so they're never going to all go away, whether it's wolves, whether it's coyotes, whatever it is. Management is the key thing. Managing the livestock, as you already know, and managing wildlife. And if we're going to be landowners, the way things are going, we continue to have a negative effect on habitat for wildlife. It's the landowners that are going to be carrying the brunt of the problems. So when I look at it that way, and I've talked to a lot of ranchers, I recommend it to them. Why not take a trapping course? It's once. It's not like a first aid course or something you got to renew every 3 years. You do it once. Yeah, it costs. I think it's $399 with the manual, but you do it once in a lifetime, and you're good. Once you're in the system, you're a licensed trapper. So anyway, those are just some things. I know that many people, the last thing they want is to have to kill an animal in order to protect their animals, and I'm glad that people care that much. The lethal system isn't something that we want to just use widespread, but it's going to become a necessary part of it when we look at it that way. When each species continues to overpopulate, that's why we're having attacks in cities and things like that from animals that we never used to worry about. They're running out of habitat. And as landowners, you may be the only remaining habitat, so it's not going to go away. So I hope this makes some sense. We do have a course that if you want to look into that, you can contact myself at the Alberta Trappers Association. Ashley knows how to get in touch with me as well. You can contact me by phone, you can email me, and if you're interested in the program, we can see if we can get you linked up with some trappers in your area. You may even know a trapper. But if you sit down, the way I look at it, if you have a trapper that knows what he's doing, he actually cares about the wildlife that he's out there getting, I would treat him well. Start working on a good working relationship, start early in the season, have a sit down, have a morning coffee, discuss what you're trying to accomplish, give them some ideas, some things you're concerned about, and start building a working relationship. We should be working together. The world has changed so much that very few people really understand nature as much as producers that are looking after large areas of land. And many of us are there to help, but we need to start working together. Does anybody have any questions on that at this point? Is there something you'd like to bring up?
I just give it like another 30 seconds or so, Ross, to see if there are any questions. And just for those that may be viewing the recording, again, as Ross had mentioned, if you do have any questions at all, you can reach out to Ross directly at the Alberta Trappers Association, or you can also reach out to myself. Again, my name is Ashley. I'm the executive director with the Alberta Land Producers, and I'm more than happy to help to link yourself up with the Trappers Association.
Yeah, we also run one-day workshops, and we do presentations for counties, things like that, to be able to help producers. Sometimes producers can get a damage control permit. Fish and Wildlife no longer issues those. The way I understand it, it's done through the wildlife biologists, provincial biologists. So it's made, put a lot more work on them, making it difficult sometimes to be able to get those. But in some cases, we've been able to do a workshop. And for those who attended that workshop, they were given that year permit or under wildlife control to use lethal neck snares, as well as restraining devices, padded foot jaw, things like that. Anyway, as I said, there are lots of opportunities for us to work together. I just want to comment real quick on, I mentioned lethal neck snares. And neck snares are a very effective device, but very few people know what they're doing. And in the wrong hands, they can be absolutely the wrong tool. We've had people putting them out that don't know what they're doing. They're not even licensed. They shouldn't even be putting them out. It's illegal. they're catching their neighbor's dogs, or they're catching other wildlife, non-target accidental catches. And that doesn't serve anything, doesn't do anybody any good. So it's extremely important. If you're looking at that, make sure that you understand that it is illegal, even on your own land, to use neck snares without a license. It is much better to either take the course yourself, as I mentioned, or get a licensed trapper to come in and do that part for you. There's lots of snares out there, but very few of them are made properly. The snares that we're using now are much. In the last decade, we have come a long, long ways. They're very, very effective. And so the whole idea, whether it's a wildlife, whatever we're doing, when we've made a decision to kill an animal, we want to make sure we do it as quickly and as humanely as possible. That's extremely important. So anyway, that's a little bit of an idea of the part that we can play in this. My dream, and when I look at all of this, is for us all to start working a lot more closely together. As I mentioned already, the bulk of the public lives in cities. They really have no idea of what it's like to be out in nature and what's actually happening. They have a very utopian idea of the way things should be. And unfortunately, they can become a very strong voice, even though they mean well. They have no real idea of what they're dealing with when it comes to nature and some of the predation issues that producers know oh so well. So thank you guys thank you very much for spending the time with me and letting me speak. Hopefully we can start working together.
Well, thank you, Ross, and to our participants who joined us this evening. This will conclude our webinar. I will be sending an email to everyone who registered for this evening's session that will include a link to where you can access the recording.
Great.